Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Today we run through our May horticulture tips. We find out how to tackle a leak in our water garden, and we learn what duct tape has to do with an American grafting technique. As we head into May, we've got some gardening tips for you to keep in mind. Now, if last month got away from you, you still have plenty of time to get your warm season crops planted, especially those heat-loving plants such as sweet potatoes, watermelon, cucumbers, and okra. Another thing to think about is your turf grass. If you had lowered your mower deck to a lower height, then you want to go ahead and raise that. Now for Bermuda grass or warm season turf grasses, you want to make sure you're at a height of 2 to 2.5 inches. And for cool season grasses, you want to make sure you're at a height of 2.5 to 3 inches. Now again, as we move into those warmer months, you can choose to still continue to fertilize your Bermuda grass, but on cool season grasses, we want to stop fertilizing them because we don't want to push them and promote any more growth as they go into that stressful heat season. Another thing to think about is with your turf grass, if you're looking at establishing a warm season lawn, between now and the end of June is a great time to seed Bermuda grass. The soil temperatures have warmed up enough to allow that seed to germinate, and also there's still plenty of time for that seedling to get established and to develop a nice sod grass that will be better and hardier going into those winter months. Now I know we haven't been traveling a lot, but there is one guest that might be in our garden that is packing their bags, and that is the bagworm. So this time of year, we might see those bagworm larvae starting to eat on some of our foliage and also develop or construct those bags that we often see hanging from the trees. In the last few years, we've had some heavy infestations, and while those might not be a problem on some of our broadleaf plants, such as maples and oaks and sycamores, they can lead to other problems such as diseases and borers. Now, there tend to be more of a problem and more detrimental on junipers and arborvitaes and also our eastern red cedars. So if you notice that you have some bagworms, if you have a small infestation, you might just decide to hand pick and remove those, and you want to go ahead and destroy those so that that larva doesn't persist in your landscape. But if you have a heavier infestation, then you want to look at getting a product called Bacillus thuringiensis, variety Kostaki, or also spinosad will work well on those. Also be sure to check your orchard for any borer problems because now's the best time to treat for those as well. The other thing that happened recently is I was pleasantly surprised on a recent trip to Tulsa that so many azaleas were still putting on a beautiful display. After our recent ice storms, I was a little concerned about that, but that was a pleasant surprise. Now, as those azaleas start to fade, you want to think about pruning back any of your azaleas and also feeding them to help supplement them through this season. Here are a few more tips to consider this month.
We're here today to talk about leaks in a pond. Not L-E-E-K, L-E-A-K. One is a plant, one is the loss of water. And that's a big question that we get this time of year, especially now after the hard freeze we've had, simply because a lot of pipes may have broken and you're not able to tell where they're leaking. So some things that we look for first is if you let the water drain down in the pond until it stops, we know the leak is somewhere around that line. That makes it pretty easy, not really, but that makes it easier to find out where the leak is. First, I want to talk about some common reasons why you think you have a leak. Number one is evaporation. Most people don't realize how much water we lose due to the sunlight, the wind, and the humidity. In Oklahoma, if you look at the weather on television at night and they tell you that we have a drought going on in the area, guess what? That means the air is dry, and that means that there's going to be a lot of water sucked up into the atmosphere. So you want to look out for evaporation first and make sure that's not happening. Second, you want to look for any plants that might have sent roots over the edge of your liner and are drawing water out of your pond to grow. If so, just cut those roots off so that you don't have one of those plants trying to suck water out of your pond. Those are two big things you can check pretty easily. After that, you start getting a little more difficult. On this pond, we have a stream over here, and that stream is a likely culprit probably 7 out of 10 times in the calls that we get. Because it's so inviting to little people to get in, walk across, for you to get in and walk across, for your dogs to get in and walk across, and they dislodge rocks, which causes water to go out of the stream bed where we don't want water to go. That you may be able to determine by looking up closely at each side of the stream and making sure there's no wet spots that shouldn't be there. Now, unfortunately, most of you are going to call after a rainstorm and you can't tell whether the ground is wet or not. So wait till it dries out and then check to see if you've got any water coming out. The other place we check next is on top of a waterfall where we have a filter. This one is covered with a large flat rock, but there's a filter under there that oftentimes has media inside it. And those filter pads and media can get so clogged up that they tilt up with the flow of the water. And that allows the water to flow out somewhere it's not supposed to. Instead of all coming out the waterfall, some of it runs off the back edge or the side. And you can't see that from where you normally look at your waterfall. So you want to check that next to make sure. Finally, if you turn off your stream and allow the pond to sink down to the depth that it's going to lose water, then you can determine that it's not in your plumbing, that that's not happening. It's somewhere inside your pond. It's not the plumbing between the pump and the top of your waterfall or the top of your stream. So now we've taken the plumbing out of the issue, so we can look now around here. This becomes very tedious because the problem is the hole can be very tiny, but over a 24-hour period it can account for a huge loss in water. So you're going to have to get in there, move those rocks out of the way if you have rocks along the side of your pond, and inspect that very closely. It's pretty wise to have one of those little 3M scrubby pads in your hand, because you're going to have to scrub some of the calcium and lime off of that liner as you go, trying to find the hole that's causing the leak in your pond. It's not difficult, but it is really pretty simple if you follow those steps. Now, most of you are looking for professional help, and you would ask for a contractor to come out and help you find your leak. That probably is the last thing you should do after you've exhausted all of these possibilities I've just talked about, because you're going to be paying him by the hour or by the day to come out and do those things. And those things can take hours and days to figure out. So you're going to have an astronomical bill if you have a contractor come and do that. So the simple solution is call a contractor. That's the most expensive and probably the last one you want to resort to. The first thing is to check for evaporation, look for plant roots, and then inspect your equipment. Make sure that the waterfall and the stream are not running out of their banks the way they're supposed to. And as in this case, they have let the water drain down, and now we look at the skimmer over here, and the water is right at the faceplate of the skimmer. So that's a likely suspect. That's somewhere we would start looking for that leak to determine if it's one of the screws, for instance, that wasn't tightened or doesn't have silicone on it to seal it good. Something that causes us to suspect that that liner around that skimmer has had something happen to it. In this case, we can see rocks that have been moved by the public getting in this pond. At home, it's your grandchildren that do it, at least they do at my house. And you'll find that sometimes a rock has been displaced and the water is now seeping out around where that rock used to seal up the place where it sat. But once the liner has been exposed to ultraviolet rays, it becomes a little stiff. And that stiffness, where there's a wrinkle, can cause almost a knife blade edge. With a rock on top of it, it's protected. When that rock is moved and somebody steps on it and moves that edge, they could cause the hole to occur right there at that break. So that's something you want to look for as you inspect around your skimmer. But those are the steps you need to go through to look and see if you can find anything wrong before you call a contractor in. Once you do that, or if you choose to do it yourself, there are patch kits available for the EPDM rubber liner that most ponds are lined with. If yours happens to be one of those that has vinyl or has a polyethylene liner in it, then those are different sealing materials that are needed. So a typical seal kit for rubber liner won't work on the others. Now you've had success and you found the hole or the tear in the liner that you can fix, and it's time to go find a patch kit. Contact your local retailer, they can help you with it.
We're here in the nursery block at the research station at Perkins, and these trees have been planted in place about 25 years. We keep cutting them back so we'll have things to practice grafting on. So they do kind of look like Frankenstein trees, but it's just kind of an area to practice with. So you can see we cut them back and they send up new shoots, and so that's what we're going to be practicing on today. Now we're going to be grafting pecans by using a 4-flap method. And the 4-flap graft is used on rootstocks that are, we want a piece of graft wood that is slightly larger than our rootstock. And if we have larger trees, bigger diameter, we'd probably use something like a bark graft. But today we're going to demonstrate the 4-flap graft, and I'm going to show you the American method of how we finish it. It's a little bit different than you may have seen in the past, and some people's jaw will probably drop when they see how I finish it, but we'll see how that goes when we get ready to finish it. Now, I have a lot of people ask, when do we graft pecans? Well, we want our rootstock, or the tree that we're going to be growing on, we want it to be growing. And so we want the bark to be slipping. And so the bark slipping means, I've got a piece right here, I'll show you. When we, the bark slipping just means that we can make a cut to this wood, and it's going to pull easily from the bark. Now, if this was in the wintertime, this wood would be stuck tight to the bark. We're exposing the cambial layer, the tissue right underneath the bark, between the bark and the wood. There's the cambial layer, and that's between the xylem and the phloem, and that's where the callus tissue will be formed to heal the two pieces together. And so this wood has to be slipping or growing actively. So we want our rootstock tree to be actively growing, but we want our graft wood or the scion wood to be dormant. And so this was collected from a cultivar that we want to grow on this rootstock. So we're going to take a known variety maybe this one, I believe this one is Kanza, which is a very popular cultivar in Oklahoma. And so we collected this in January or February before these buds started to swell. And you can see it has nice primary buds exposed. This is 1-year-old wood, and this is kept in the refrigerator, maybe like in your crisper or somewhere in a Ziploc bag where it's cool and moist, but it's not overly wet and it's not frozen either. So we want to protect our wood. Now we're going to graft about in this area. We want to look for an area that doesn't have a lot of bud scars or nice slick bark. It makes it easier. So I'm going to go ahead and take my loppers and I'm going to cut this off about right here. Just a nice flat cut right there. Now I'm going to look for a piece of graft wood that is slightly larger than that right there. So I'll take my wood and I'll find one. See, this one is a little bit bigger in diameter, so that's what we're looking for. It doesn't seem like, it seems a little large, but actually you'll see how that will actually work out better in the end. I'm going to look at one more piece. It's a little bit, has a few more buds, but I like this piece. So you can see there's quite a bit of difference in the size, the diameter of the rootstock and the piece of graft wood. So we've got our piece of graft wood selected. We've got our rootstock ready, except I need one more tool. That is a rubber band. And the rubber band is going to pretend, it's kind of going to be my third hand eventually. It's going to help me hold it in place. So I'm going to loosely wrap that around there. And so I'll be able to use that in a little bit. Now when I'm making cuts on the rootstock for my flaps, the 4-flap graft is also called a banana graft. I want to make our flaps about the length of my grafting knife blade. So I put my grafting knife up against the wood, and you see where my hand is and my thumb is pressing against the knife. I don't want my hand up here because I can slice right through that wood sometimes and I may slice my hand open. So I want to have my hand below it and press with my thumb. And it just kind of inserts in the bark, and then when you hit that wood, it stops. So that's far enough. That's right where you want to be. Now I'm going to go to the other side and do another cut exactly like that. So we're going to end up with 4 cuts. So we've got our flaps cut. They're ready to go. So you can kind of loosen them up a little bit. So I've got my flaps cut, and now I'm going to make cuts on my piece of graft wood. So I'm going to start on one side, about the same length as my blade, so the same length of my flap, and I'm going to make a cut to expose that cambial layer. So all along here, that cambial tissue is exposed. Now I'm going to flip it all the way over and make another cut all the way across, make another cut. So I'm making 4 flaps that are about the same size, or 4 cups that are about the same size as my flaps. And you can see that it's exposed that cambial tissue in lots of areas. The more cambial contact between the graft wood and the piece of, and the rootstock, the better chance of success in your graft union. So we'll go ahead and peel our flaps back. So you can see why it's called a banana graft, right? Looks like a banana. And I'll take my pruners, my hand clippers, and carefully, I want to cut this plug out without cutting off the flaps. Now I'm going to insert my graft wood. Make sure that your buds are pointed up because we don't want to do it upside down. And then we want to line up the flaps where it makes good connection with that cambial tissue on the cuts on our graft wood. So you can see we've got there's kind of some graft wood exposed. And so if our graft wood was the same size as our rootstock, we wouldn't have as good connection on some of these flaps. Now, in the past, we've always used tape to go around this, masking tape or budding tape, and then put foil on it and then put a baggie over it. But today I'm going to show you the American method that one of our growers, Mr. Jim Smith down at Shawnee, he started using this, and it seems to work really well. But we're going to use something that sounds all American. We're going to use duct tape. But we're going to start below our cuts, so below here, and we're going to wrap this tightly, but not so tight that we move our flaps, okay? So we want to make it firm, but not where we're moving them, because we've got it lined up where we want it. And then make sure that that's all covered up nice. And so if you kind of test it, you can see that's pretty firm. If it was flopping or loose in there, then we know it wouldn't have a very good connection, and our callus tissue may not form very well. So we've got it on there and it seems pretty tight, so that's a good sign. Now at this stage, you can either use wood glue, Elmer's glue, or shellac, amber shellac. I kind of like to use amber shellac. I've got amber shellac in here. You can find it at your home stores, department stores. It used to be called orange shellac, but now you can find it as amber shellac. And so amber shellac will stain your clothes, so you have to be careful not to get it all over you, which I usually end up with some on myself. But I'm just going to paint the entire part of this piece of graft wood that's exposed. And that's just going to kind of keep the moisture inside that piece of graft wood. We don't want it to dry out. Putting it over the buds and everything. So there's a bud right here and a bud on this side. So once they start to swell, they'll break through this amber shellac and grow just fine. Now we have one last step that we want to do before we leave this graft. We wanted to make a little perch. So if the bird lands on there, it's going to land on our perch instead of our graft. A bird has a lot of force when it takes off. And so if they're landing on our graft that we've made, they can, when they take off, they can weaken that union. So we're going to just put a stick. You can use bamboo stakes or whatever, but just cut off a branch. And now that bird's going to land right here instead of right here. So it can sit here, and if it flips off, when it flies, it will move this instead of moving our graft union. Now this graft, it may take a few weeks for those buds to start pushing. It just depends on the weather conditions and how well this rootstock is growing. And so whenever it starts to push the buds, we know that it's making some connection in between the rootstock and that piece of graft wood. But our graft from this part up, from right here that's exposed up, is going to be exactly like the tree that this piece of graft wood was removed from. So it's going to be a pecan that's produced off of this type off this piece of wood. Now if we get new shoots like this bud down here, if it starts to grow, then it's going to be the rootstock. So we would want to remove that at some point. But we want to leave what's from here up to produce our pecans. When we graft, we are getting a known variety. We are also speeding up the time to production. A grafted tree is going to produce nuts much quicker, since this wood was taken from a mature tree and our rootstock is juvenile. So that tree would have to grow to full size to be sexually mature before it would actually start to fruit. But since we've taken a piece of wood from a mature tree, it's going to be able to produce fruit much quicker. So maybe on some varieties it may be like maybe 3 to 5 years before we have a really a good crop on these. So This is the American method of the 4-flap graft, or some people call it a banana graft. There's videos on the Pecan webpage. There's fact sheets that have pictures step by step on how to do this procedure, and lots of good information that you can find on that Pecan webpage.
There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, as we pave our way into warmer temperatures, we'll show you how to incorporate blueberries into any garden, an alternative way to grow a succulent, and then we'll turn the spotlight on our Oklahoma Gardening Director who's been with the show for over 22 years. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.